And joining us right now to this conversation is Belkis Wille, Yemen and Kuwait Researcher, Human Rights Watch, is with us from Istanbul. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us, Belkis.
Thank you for having me.
So, Belkis, what are the evidence that you found that shows the use of cluster bombs on the ground?
Well, first it's worth pointing out that Saudi Arabia already used cluster munitions in Yemen in a war it participated in between the Yemeni government and the Houthis in 2009. As a result of our documenting of cluster munitions at that time, we raised concerns the first day after airstrikes began in this war, calling on the Saudis to say on the record that they would not be using cluster munitions. The next day in a press conference, a spokesman said indeed they were not using cluster munitions. Several days later, however, we received video evidence of parachutes landing from an airstrike, parachutes that deliver a weapons system that looked to us like cluster munitions that we knew that an American company had sold to Saudi Arabia in 2013. Unfortunately, we could not determine from the film alone that this was indeed the cluster munitions that we thought. We could only do that with photo evidence of the remnants landing on the ground that would demonstrate to us that these were indeed the munitions we thought they were. And several days later, we received photos from local residents in northern Yemen. They sent us photos of exactly those cluster munitions that we had suspected were used. So what we then needed to determine is through satellite imagery, we were able to verify the film as true and as filmed exactly from where locals told us it was in Yemen.
So from where are coming let's say the evidence or any knowledge that these cluster bombs were actually supplied by the United States?
So these contracts are actually fully transparent and on the record. One can find in open source information these kind of weapons deals done by companies with different governments. And in fact, the deal struck in the delivery of these weapons from an American company to Saudi Arabia was very much public. The U.S. has a policy, however, that these kind of weapons cannot be sold to countries who use them in civilian living areas. And this is why our evidence is so damning. Through our satellite imagery, we were able to demonstrate that these weapons were used in an area where there are 4 to 6 villages where civilians are living, and therefore the use of these cluster munitions is not only a violation of international standards, but is also a direct violation of the U.S. policy when it sold the weapons to Saudi Arabia.
You know, what are the chances that Saudi Arabia will, let's say, straight the line with the rest of the world and actually will say, well, you know what, yeah, we made a mistake, we used cluster bombs, we're going to stop using them anymore?
Unfortunately, we have no sense as of yet that Saudi Arabia is willing to concede and acknowledge our evidence and address our evidence. However, what I do hope at the very least will happen is that members of the coalition and indeed countries that support the coalition, like the United States, are going to put a real push on the Saudi government to immediately state on the record that going forward in this war, it will not use cluster munitions again, and indeed it will not use them in civilian living areas in any future conflict.
Yes, Belkis Wille, thank you very, very much for this conversation with us. You know,